Rust might be one of the most misunderstood languages, not because it's overly complex, but because it forces you to completely rethink how you write software. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed or felt like the compiler just hates you, you're definitely not alone. And it's not because you're not smart enough for Rust, it's probably because you've been learning it the wrong way. In this video, I'll explain how not to learn Rust. These aren't just mistakes that I've made, they're the same ones I've seen trip up even experienced senior engineers. And knowing how to avoid them will save you a ton of frustration. So let's dive in. The first mistake is thinking you can write Rust code the same way you've written code in other languages. When I first started learning Rust, I was a senior web developer using JavaScript and TypeScript, building web and mobile apps. I also had some C++ experience from my previous work projects at Salesforce. So I figured I had a good foundation for starting Rust. I was familiar with async code, pointers, and building large systems from scratch. But that confidence quickly disappeared when I started building even small programs in Rust. At first, I treated Rust like JavaScript, quickly prototyping and hacking things together just to get it running. And given my C++ experience, I thought I could just use pointers and references freely. But the Rust compiler wouldn't let me. It wasn't just throwing errors, it was straight up stopping me from writing code the way I was used to. The thing is, I was carrying over habits that Rust explicitly tries to prevent. Relying on mutation everywhere, especially shared mutation, which Rust is allergic to unless it's explicitly safe. Treating the compiler like some annoying thing I have to fight instead of something trying to help me. Ignoring proper module organization and dumping everything into a few huge files. And expecting to just figure it out as I go instead of thinking through code design up front. And over the years with Let's Get Rusty, I've seen this pattern play out over and over again with my students, even if they're seasoned engineers from companies like Amazon or Meta. These were smart, experienced engineers, but the mental models that worked for them in other languages didn't carry over to Rust the way they expected. To really understand Rust and take full advantage of its type system, you often have to unlearn a few habits. It takes a mental shift in how you think about code to write Rust the way it wants to be written. Once I stopped trying to force Rust to work like every other language, that's when things slowly started to click for me. By the way, this video is part of a series for the upcoming official launch of my Rust Live Accelerator program. More on that later. The second mistake is neglecting the most important 20% of Rust. One of the most common mistakes I see developers make when learning Rust, especially experienced developers, is trying to learn everything at once. I'm definitely guilty of this as well. You jump between traits, lifetimes, macros, unsafe Rust, async Rust, smart pointers, and you end up feeling overwhelmed and scattered. Rust feels huge, and when everything feels important, it's really hard to make progress on anything. But here's the thing, you don't need to know all of Rust to get started, and you definitely don't need to learn it all at once. What you do need is to focus on the key 20% of Rust that will give you 80% of the knowledge you need to become productive in Rust. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're a backend engineer and you specialize in designing and building distributed systems. Well, in that case, you want to have a more extensive knowledge of async Rust, the Tokyo runtime, Rust's trace system, and serialization and deserialization in Rust. But you don't have to be an expert in the borrow checker or the foreign function interface. On the other hand, let's say you're a low-level systems or embedded engineer. Then you'll need to understand the borrow checker, the foreign function interface, no STD Rust, allocators, and the type state pattern in Rust like the back of your hand. Whatever you specialize in, be it high-performance desktop apps, or smart contracts in Rust, or whatever else, you'll need to learn the 20% of Rust that will make you productive for that specific use case. The key is you want to learn just enough to start building real Rust software as fast as possible. Which brings us to mistake number 3, being a productive procrastinator. You've probably fallen into this trap at some point. I definitely have. That feeling of, hey, maybe if I just watch one more video or read one more blog post, then I'll be ready. And the terrible thing about this is that it really does feel like you're making progress. You're making an effort here and you're checking off boxes. It's the path of least resistance, right? Sometimes it's so easy to confuse passively consuming information online with actually getting better at your craft and improving your skills, because it gives you that little dopamine hit of, hey, I did something today. But the truth is, most of us spend way too much time consuming online material and way too little time with hands-on practice. There's actually research on this, a concept in learning science called productive failure. In one study, researchers gave participants a complex problem to solve before they were taught the underlying concepts. Most of them struggled and failed, but when they were later given formal instruction, they showed a significantly deeper understanding of the material and resulted in much higher scores compared to those who were simply taught the solution up front. And this applies to Rust perfectly. It's not enough to just memorize some syntax and follow some tutorials. You have to internalize these concepts by encountering them in real applications. Maybe you're trying to model real-world business logic with structs and enums, and you keep running into edge cases where your type design starts to fall apart. Or you're trying to write an async service with trait interfaces, and you run into issues combining async traits and generics. Every Rust beginner has to face these challenges head-on, because you won't learn and internalize these concepts by simply watching more tutorials or copying and pasting code around. Speaking of copy-pasting code around, the fourth mistake is thinking you can just vibe code Rust like it's JavaScript. Don't get me wrong, using LLMs in your development workflow is extremely helpful and I do it all the time. But I've met way too many developers who jump right into vibe coding a Rust application without any fundamental knowledge of the language. And they end up with a giant mess they can't debug. They can't explain what the code is doing, they don't know how to adapt it when requirements change, and the moment something breaks, they're completely stuck. Rust isn't like other languages where you can get by with a rough mental model. If you don't understand core concepts like the ownership model, traits and generics, or why the borrow checker keeps yelling at you, no amount of LLM generated code is going to save you. And you know what the worst part is? LLMs give you a false sense of progress. You feel like you're moving fast until you get yourself buried in trait errors, lifetime mismatches, and weird edge cases you don't even know how to describe. So again, make sure you get a foundational knowledge in Rust before you start vibing. These are only a few of the mistakes I've made and that I see my students making when learning Rust. The truth is, Rust isn't known for being the easiest language to pick up. And that's exactly why I created the Rust Live Accelerator, a private group training program where you can get personalized help directly from me to become a high-performing, highly paid Rust developer. Now, because I'll personally be working with students directly, we are only accepting 25 students. So make sure to join the waitlist to be the first to know when we start accepting applicants by heading over to letsgetrusty.com/join. Hope you've enjoyed today's video, get on the waitlist, and I'll talk to you again very soon.